The sky over Europe in 1940 was a tapestry of smoke and fire. The cities below smoldering, the rivers blackened with debris and destruction. It was a landscape of despair, a stage set for one of the most decisive battles in history. And above it all roared a new kind of warrior, a flying beast that would soon become legendary, the P-47 Thunderbolt. It was not just a fighter plane, it was a flying fortress, a metal colossus designed to withstand punishment that would destroy any ordinary aircraft, and to deliver it back with unrelenting fury. Pilots who climbed into its cockpit understood that each mission could be their last. Yet they took to the skies with a mix of fear, courage, and a grim determination to dominate their enemies. America had watched Europe burn from across the Atlantic, aware that the storm would inevitably reach its shores if the tide of war continued. The Luftwaffe's dominance in the early years had proven the necessity of a machine that could not only survive the heaviest flak and the deadliest enemy fighters, but also strike with power that few could counter. Enter Alexander Kartveli, an engineer with vision, stubbornness, and a belief in building something the world had never seen. While others sought speed and maneuverability, Kartveli imagined a plane that combined immense power, heavy armor, and devastating firepower. He wanted a machine that could not just survive, it would crush. The Thunderbolt's design was radical. A 2,000 horsepower radial engine powered the plane, giving it the thrust of a rocket. Its fuselage was wide and armored, the wings robust enough to carry enormous fuel tanks and heavy cannons. Its armament was unprecedented. 8 50 caliber machine guns capable of tearing apart enemy formations and ground targets alike. It was big, it was heavy, and it was terrifying to anyone who underestimated it. Test pilots initially doubted whether such a massive machine could even fly with the agility required in combat. But once they experienced the first flights, their doubts turned to awe. The P-47 was a flying tank, a fortress in the sky, a guardian angel for its pilots, and a nightmare for the enemy. The first operational missions began over the skies of France, where chaos reigned. Pilots quickly learned that flying the Thunderbolt was unlike any other experience. It could dive at incredible speeds, shrug off hits that would down lesser planes, and return fire with a ferocity that few could match. Each mission was a ballet of death, with clouds of flak, enemy fighters, and the constant hum of engines filling the sky. The P-47's resilience allowed pilots to push the boundaries, taking on missions that previously would have been considered suicidal. Its presence changed the dynamic of aerial warfare, transforming missions from mere reconnaissance or escort duty into full-scale offensive operations, capable of decimating enemy ground and air forces. The legend of the Thunderbolt grew with every 40 young American pilots, some barely old enough to vote, found themselves entrusted with a machine that could turn the tide of a battle. They flew over bombed-out cities, across forests scarred by combat, and along rivers choked with wreckage, knowing that their plane was more than just steel and engine. It was a weapon of fate. Each flight brought them closer to danger, yet closer also to immortality. As the stories of their exploits spread among squadrons and across nations, the P-47 Thunderbolt quickly proved its worth in the skies over occupied Europe. Pilots who had once flown lighter, faster aircraft discovered that sheer resilience and firepower could change the rules of aerial combat. Unlike smaller fighters that relied on nimbleness, the Thunderbolt's strength lay in its ability to absorb punishment, dive at incredible speeds, and strike with overwhelming force. It became both shield and sword for the Allies. Early missions over France and the Low Countries showed the world a plane that could survive flak bursts that shredded wings off other fighters. A plane whose 8.50 caliber machine guns could tear enemy aircraft apart before they even realized what hit them. Young pilots, often barely 20 years old, felt the weight of responsibility every time they climbed into the cockpit. They were entrusted with a machine unlike anything ever flown before, and its reputation quickly became legendary. Stories of pilots returning from missions with holes in their fuselage large enough to see the sky through, engines still roaring, and bullets lodged in places that would have destroyed lesser planes, spread through the ranks. Each tale reinforced the Thunderbolt's aura. It was more than metal, it was a near-mythical force that could turn the tide of a battle, yet demanded absolute respect and skill to wield. The Luftwaffe, initially dismissive of this newcomer, soon realized its destructive potential. Enemy pilots learned that engaging a P-47 in a head-on confrontation was often suicidal. Its speed in a dive allowed it to chase down adversaries and escape situations that would trap other fighters. Its heavy armor and armament made it a formidable opponent in dogfights. The psychological impact on both the Allies and the Axis cannot be overstated. For the Americans, the Thunderbolt was a source of confidence and courage, while for the Germans, it became a symbol of a new unstoppable force descending from the skies. Ground attack missions further showcased the Thunderbolt's versatility. Unlike aircraft designed solely for air combat, the P-47 could carry bombs and rockets, making it a devastating instrument against enemy supply lines, trains, and fortifications. Villages and bridges that once seemed untouchable fell to these relentless raids, and the German war machine began to feel the impact of this dual-purpose fighter. Pilots reported that flying low over enemy positions, dodging flak bursts, and firing with all 8 machine guns was an experience both terrifying and exhilarating. Every mission demanded total concentration, yet the plane's power allowed them to perform maneuvers that would have destroyed lighter aircraft. The Thunderbolt also fostered a sense of brotherhood among pilots. Veteran flyers mentored new recruits, teaching them not only how to handle the immense power of the plane, but also how to survive its unique challenges. Every flight forged trust, camaraderie, and the shared understanding that the cockpit of a P-47 was both a place of power and a chamber of death. Letters home, diaries, and oral accounts from these pilots revealed the mixture of awe, fear, and respect that defined their relationship with the aircraft. They spoke of it not merely as a machine, but as a partner in battle, a guardian, and sometimes the difference between life and death. By late 1943 and early 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had cemented its reputation across multiple theaters of war. Squadrons equipped with this formidable machine began to dominate the skies, providing indispensable support to the strategic bombing campaigns against Nazi-occupied Europe. Every mission showcased not only the plane's mechanical superiority, but also the extraordinary skill and bravery of the men who flew it. Fighter groups patrolled the skies relentlessly, protecting vulnerable bombers on perilous routes deep into enemy territory. The Thunderbolt's combination of firepower, speed in a dive, and rugged construction allowed it to engage enemy fighters aggressively while minimizing losses. One particularly memorable engagement involved a large formation of Thunderbolts escorting bombers over a critical industrial city in Germany. Enemy fighters swarmed in waves, intent on downing the bombers before they could release their payloads. The Thunderbolts, however, moved like an unbreakable wall. Pilots dived into the enemy formations, triggering bursts of .50 caliber rounds that tore apart the attacking aircraft with surgical precision. Even when hit by flak or enemy fire, the planes absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lighter fighters. By the end of the mission, dozens of enemy aircraft had been destroyed, while the bombers completed their strike with minimal losses. The Thunderbolt's legend grew with every encounter. Ground attack missions further demonstrated the aircraft's versatility. In addition to escort duties, Thunderbolts were deployed to disrupt supply lines, railways, fuel depots, and communication hubs. Low-level attacks required exceptional skill. Pilots flew just above the treetops to evade anti-aircraft guns, releasing rockets and bombs with devastating effect. These strikes crippled enemy logistics, slowed troop movements, and directly contributed to the success of Allied ground operations. The Thunderbolt was more than a fighter, it was a force multiplier, extending the reach of Allied strategy from the air to the ground. Squadron leaders often recounted stories of heroism and ingenuity. One mission involved a pilot whose landing gear had been damaged by flak, yet he completed a crucial bombing run before gliding his crippled plane safely back to base. Another involved a formation that faced overwhelming odds. Yet through disciplined formation flying, mutual support, and the sheer durability of the Thunderbolt, they emerged victorious. Each account added to the lore surrounding the aircraft and its crews. These stories were shared at airfields, in mess halls, and in letters home, inspiring confidence and respect among pilots and civilians alike. The legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt extended beyond individual missions. Its presence altered the tactics and morale of the Luftwaffe, forced strategic adaptations, and contributed significantly to the success of Allied operations. Pilots who survived multiple sorties became living legends, embodying the combination of courage, skill, and resilience that the aircraft itself represented. By the end of 1944, the Thunderbolt had firmly established itself as a decisive element in the air war over Europe, an embodiment of American industrial might and engineering brilliance, and a symbol of hope for the Allies in their fight against tyranny. As the months passed and the Thunderbolt continued to dominate the skies over Europe, its legend only grew. Pilots who once feared the impossible now trusted in their machine, executing daring missions with a confidence that could only come from knowing they flew the toughest fighter of the war. Every sortie, every engagement, every mission that ended in victory or survival strengthened the bond between man and machine. The P-47 was not merely a plane, it was a symbol of resilience, ingenuity, and the unyielding spirit of those who refused to yield to tyranny. By the end of 1944, as Europe began to turn in favor of the Allies, the Thunderbolt stood as a testament to the courage of its pilots and the vision of its designers, a flying fortress whose roar would echo through history long after the war had ended. The story of its first missions, its trials, and its triumphs would be remembered as the defining chapter in the saga of aerial warfare, marking the rise of an American legend that changed the skies forever. The winter of 1943 had settled heavily across Europe, covering ruined cities, shattered fields, and abandoned villages with a thin sheet of frost. But there was nothing cold or quiet about the skies above them. For the pilots of the P-47 Thunderbolt, winter only meant colder cockpits, thicker fog, and engines that needed longer to warm, yet the missions continued without pause. The Thunderbolt had now become more than a powerful machine. It was a symbol of the tightening Allied grip on the war. The Luftwaffe, once dominant, was beginning to feel the pressure as the P-47's presence grew stronger every week. Engineers refined the aircraft's turbocharger efficiency, ground crews improved turnaround times, and pilots rapidly learned tactics that maximized the Thunderbolt's strengths in both escort and ground attack roles. By early 1944, the Allied strategy had shifted dramatically. High-altitude bombing runs deep into German territory had become routine, and for these operations to succeed, bomber formations needed relentless protection. This is where the P-47 truly earned its reputation. Its massive radial engine made it nearly impossible to knock out with a single burst of enemy fire, and its speed in a dive allowed Thunderbolt pilots to drop from the clouds like falling steel, tearing through German interceptors before they could reach the bombers. Luftwaffe pilots soon learned that engaging a Thunderbolt head-on was a gamble rarely worth taking. Although the German Bf-109 and FW-190 were excellent fighters, they struggled to match the P-47's durability and diving capability. Many German pilots later recalled their frustration as Thunderbolts simply refused to go down, even after heavy hits. At the same time, the Thunderbolt's role expanded far beyond escort duty. As the Allies prepared for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, air superiority became essential. The P-47's ability to carry bombs and rockets turned it into a flying hammer capable of smashing rail lines, convoys, anti-aircraft posts, and supply depots. Pilots flew low over French villages and forest roads, striking anything that moved with devastating force. Each destroyed train or fuel truck slowed German mobility, making it harder for the Wehrmacht to respond quickly to Allied advances. These attacks were not glamorous, and they were extremely dangerous. Flying low meant flying directly into machine gun fire, flak bursts, and hidden anti-aircraft cannons. Many Thunderbolts returned home with wings shredded, oil leaking, and engines coughing. But they still made it back, something few other aircraft could promise. Meanwhile, the training pipeline for new P-47 pilots reached full speed. Young men from American farms, cities, and small towns found themselves strapped into a machine more powerful than anything they had ever touched. Instructors emphasized engine management, dive, discipline, and situational awareness. The Thunderbolt was forgiving, but only if respected. A careless dive or an overloaded climb could push the aircraft to its limits. Yet once a pilot truly understood how to harness its weight and power, he became extraordinarily lethal. Veterans began teaching new tactics: boom and zoom attacks, slashing passes, and formation diving. These techniques allowed Thunderbolt groups to work together like a pack of steel wolves hunting across the sky. As D-Day approached, pressure intensified. Every Allied airfield in England became a hive of activity. Crews worked through the night, loading rockets, aligning machine guns, and inspecting engines. Pilots memorized maps of French fortifications and coastal defenses. The morning of June 6, 1944, the P-47s roared over the English Channel, heading toward Normandy. Below them, thousands of ships moved like a steel tide toward the beaches. Thunderbolts flew strafing runs against German positions, knocking out artillery, cutting communication lines, and destroying reinforcements before they reached the front. The invasion was one of the most dangerous and chaotic operations of the war. But without the relentless support of aircraft like the P-47, the landings would have faced far greater resistance. Once the Allies secured a foothold in France, the P-47's role evolved again. Forward airfields were constructed quickly, allowing Thunderbolts to operate closer to the battlefront. This meant shorter missions, more sorties per day, and faster responses to ground requests. Infantry commanders increasingly relied on Thunderbolt groups to break German counterattacks. When tanks or armored columns advanced, pilots were scrambled immediately, diving through smoke and dust to deliver bombs and rockets with pinpoint accuracy. Some units even began coordinating directly with ground troops through radio transmissions, forming the early foundation of modern close air support tactics. Throughout the summer of 1944, the Thunderbolt became a nightmare for German transport lines. Every road, bridge, tunnel, and convoy fell under constant surveillance. Pilots hunted locomotives with almost surgical precision, attacking boiler sections to cause catastrophic explosions that tore trains apart. Fuel tankers became priority targets because without fuel, German tanks and trucks were nothing but metal giants stranded in the mud. The P-47's 8.50 caliber machine guns shredded these targets with brutal efficiency. Entire convoys could be destroyed in minutes, turning highways into twisted scrapyards. But as the Allies advanced deeper into Europe, the fighting grew more desperate. German flak batteries multiplied, and enemy pilots, though fewer in number, fought with fierce determination. Thunderbolt losses increased. Pilots were forced to fly at altitudes so low that treetops sometimes brushed their wingtips. The margin for error became razor-thin. Many young pilots who had survived aerial combat met their fate from ground fire. Veterans recalled how every mission felt like a coin toss, yet they climbed into their aircraft day after day, driven by duty, momentum, and the belief that the war's end was approaching. By autumn, the Allied push toward Germany intensified. Supply shortages, fuel desperation, and overwhelming Allied air pressure weakened the Wehrmacht. But winter brought new challenges. Fog, snow, and freezing temperatures grounded many operations. Yet, when the Battle of the Bulge erupted in December 1944, Thunderbolt groups were called once again to save the situation. When weather finally cleared, P-47 pilots launched wave after wave of attacks against German armor and infantry attempting to break through Allied lines. Their precision strikes on tanks, bridges, and supply convoys broke the momentum of the German offensive. Commanders on the ground later stated that air power, especially the P-47, played a decisive role in stopping the offensive and turning the tide permanently in favor of the Allies. By early 1945, the end of the war felt near. German cities were in ruins, airfields destroyed, and the Luftwaffe nearly broken. Thunderbolts now roamed German skies with little opposition, hitting strategic targets, supporting ground forces, and ensuring no retreat or regrouping was possible. Pilots, who had once feared every mission now, flew with the confidence of veterans who understood their machine completely. They saw the results of their efforts on every battlefield: disabled tanks, ruined bridges, abandoned artillery, and scattered convoys. The P-47 had helped carve a path straight toward victory. As Allied troops closed in on Berlin, Thunderbolt groups completed their final missions, cutting off escape routes, hitting remaining military installations, and supplying ground forces with constant aerial support. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, many P-47 pilots realized for the first time just how deeply their aircraft had shaped the course of the war. The Thunderbolt had started as a heavy, intimidating fighter, but it had ended as one of the most versatile and decisive aircraft ever built. Its toughness, firepower, and reliability saved countless lives and ensured the success of critical operations, from Normandy to the final battles in Germany. The legacy of the P-47 did not end with the war. Many units transitioned to new roles. Some aircraft were sent to Allied nations, and others became test platforms for future aviation technology. But among those who flew it, the memory of the Thunderbolt remained unmatched. Pilots described it not just as a machine, but as a partner, a steel giant that carried them through the most dangerous skies the world had ever seen. Even decades later, veterans still recalled the roar of the engine, the vibration of the guns, and the feeling of near invincibility the Thunderbolt gave them. Part 2 ends here as the war approaches its final chapters, setting the stage for the final evolution of the P-47 and the concluding phase of its legendary journey. As the final year of World War II began, the P-47 Thunderbolt had already carved its name deep into the history of aerial warfare, but its most decisive contributions were still ahead. By early 1945, the aircraft had evolved not only in design but in purpose, becoming one of the most feared multi-role machines the Allies possessed. Fighter pilots, ground crews, and commanders across the European and Pacific theaters all understood one unmistakable truth. The Thunderbolt was no longer just a fighter, it was a symbol of unstoppable Allied momentum. A metal giant carved from American engineering and sharpened by the experience of thousands of missions. While earlier stages of the war had forced the Thunderbolt to focus on bomber escort and defensive operations, by 1945 its mission profile shifted dramatically. The Luftwaffe, once a powerful and relentless adversary, was now crippled. Aircraft production had collapsed, fuel reserves were nearly depleted, and trained pilots were almost non-existent. What remained were scattered pockets of resistance, desperate, unpredictable, and dangerous. Yet it was in this chaotic environment that the P-47 reached its true peak, proving that durability, firepower, and versatility could outmatch even the most technologically advanced enemy weapons. The introduction of late-war Thunderbolt variants, especially the P-47D and the high-powered P-47M, changed the dynamic of the air war. These versions boasted improved engines, turbochargers, aerodynamic refinements, and enhanced firepower, allowing them to dive faster, climb higher, and strike harder than ever before. Ground attack sorties became the Thunderbolt's specialty. Pilots were now equipped with rockets, bombs, and 8.50 caliber machine guns that could tear apart trains, tanks, armored columns, and even hardened bunkers. The Thunderbolt descended on German supply lines with devastating precision. Bridges collapsed, locomotives erupted in clouds of steam and fire, and retreating forces were hammered relentlessly. Every mission brought new challenges. Anti-aircraft guns, though poorly supplied, still posed a lethal threat. Many pilots described flying so low that they could see the faces of German gunners before releasing their rockets. The Thunderbolt's thick armor and rugged construction often made the difference between life and death. Men returned to base with wings shot full of holes, engines smoking, and landing gear barely functioning, yet they returned. Mechanics grew used to repairing aircraft that seemed too damaged to fly again. But the Thunderbolt always flew again. The psychological impact of the P-47 became impossible for enemy forces to ignore. The mere sound of its engine was enough to send troops scrambling for cover. German soldiers nicknamed it the 4-ton monster and the juggernaut, acknowledging its size and power. Allied troops, on the ground, especially infantry advancing through hostile territory, viewed the Thunderbolt as a guardian angel. When columns stalled under enemy fire, a call for air support would often summon a squadron of Thunderbolts, diving out of the clouds like avenging spirits, leaving only smoke and silence in their wake. In early 1945, as Allied forces closed in on the Rhine River, the Thunderbolt played a critical role in destroying the last remaining bridges the Germans attempted to use for troop retreat. One mission in particular became legendary among pilots. A squadron of P-47s was ordered to prevent a large German armored division from crossing a temporary pontoon bridge. Visibility was terrible. Smoke, fog, and heavy ground fire turned the mission into a nightmare. Yet the Thunderbolts descended anyway, attacking through sheets of anti-aircraft tracers. Rockets tore into the bridge, collapsing it in seconds, while bombs struck the waiting tanks. The armored division never crossed. For the men on the ground, it was the difference between life and annihilation. As Germany's defenses crumbled, captured documents revealed how deeply the Thunderbolt had influenced enemy strategy. German commanders urged their units to avoid moving during daylight hours, and when movement was absolutely necessary, they warned troops to camouflage vehicles, spread out formations, and prepare for Thunderbolt attacks that could strike without warning. Even the feared Me-262 jet fighters, the fastest aircraft in the world at that time, could not fully escape the Thunderbolt's presence. The jets were deadly in the air, but vulnerable during takeoff and landing. P-47 pilots exploited this weakness with daring low-altitude attacks on jet bases, destroying the jets before they ever left the ground. The final months of the war witnessed the Thunderbolt at the height of its destructive power. Rail networks collapsed, supply convoys burned, and armored forces were shattered long before reaching the front. The aircraft's operational record became almost unbelievable. Hundreds of thousands of sorties flown, millions of pounds of ordnance dropped, and thousands of enemy vehicles destroyed. The Thunderbolt did not win the war alone, but many historians agree that without it, the Allied ground advance would have been significantly slower and far more costly. When the war in Europe finally ended in May 1945, many pilots who had survived years of combat walked across quiet airfields and looked at their Thunderbolts with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. These machines had carried them through fire and chaos, protected them in impossible circumstances, and returned them home when everything else seemed lost. Some pilots insisted on flying one last ceremonial pass over their bases before shutting down the engines forever. Others sat quietly in their cockpits, running their hands over the controls, remembering the missions, the victories, and the friends who never returned. But the P-47's story did not end with Europe. In the Pacific, the aircraft played a crucial role in the final campaigns against Japan. Though overshadowed there by the P-51 Mustang and the legendary F-6F Hellcat, the Thunderbolt still proved its worth in operations over the Philippines, Okinawa, and the Japanese mainland. Its ability to absorb punishment made it ideal for long missions over water, and its firepower was devastating against entrenched island defenses. Pilots flew through monsoon storms, tropical heat, and unpredictable winds, striking airfields, ships, and fortified positions with unmatched reliability. By the time the war ended in August 1945, the Thunderbolt had completed a journey unlike any other aircraft of the era. It had transformed from a heavy experimental fighter into one of the most formidable war machines ever built. It had faced the best enemy aircraft, challenged new jet technology, supported Allied troops across continents, and survived battles that pushed aviation to its limits. The aircraft's legacy became a cornerstone of aviation history, studied by engineers, admired by pilots, and remembered by historians as one of the true giants of the air. After the war, thousands of Thunderbolts were retired, sold, or transferred to Allied nations. Some went to South America, others to Europe, and many continued flying well into the 1950s. Even decades later, restored P-47s that fly in airshows still draw enormous crowds. When people look up and see that massive silhouette with its powerful engine rumbling through the sky, they are witnessing the spirit of an aircraft that helped shape the outcome of the greatest conflict in human history. The true legacy of the P-47 is not just in its missions, its firepower, or its incredible durability. Its legacy lives in the stories of the men who flew it, their courage, their sacrifice, and their ability to remain unbroken in the face of overwhelming danger. These pilots carried more than bombs and rockets. They carried the hopes of millions waiting for peace. And with every mission, they brought that peace one step closer. As history continues to unfold, one thing remains certain: the P-47 Thunderbolt stands as one of the most iconic aircraft of World War II, a machine whose thunderous roar helped silence the guns of tyranny and restore freedom to a world pushed to the brink. As history continues to unfold, one thing remains certain: the P-47 Thunderbolt stands as one of the most iconic aircraft of World War II, a machine whose thunderous roar helped silence the guns of tyranny and restore freedom to a world pushed to the brink. If you enjoyed this historical journey and want more deep documentary-style World War II stories, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your next requested topic below.